For better or worse, this is it. This is the last episode we're going to have of the Ferrari until we fly to Australia in August, where we're going to race it in the World Time Attack Challenge. But before we send it out of the country, I've got a big episode for you guys. I've got a livery install and one final track test session. So we're going to go rip on this thing. But before we do that, we've got one round of repairs to make. So let's dive into it. If you're living under a rock and somehow missed our last episode, we took the Ferrari 244 GTK out to Willow Raceway Park for its first ever test session. It was a remarkable day for me, more than 2.5 years in the making, and the car did remarkably well. We had a few teething issues, but nothing that I would say is a catastrophic failure. Everything on the car felt tight, firm planted, exactly as you'd hope for on a first test drive. And it probably goes without saying that this thing is fast, too. Our day was cut a little bit short, though, once we lost one of the coupling clamps for our charge piping. Without it, we were unable to build boost or filter the air going into the engine, so we loaded the car up and called it a day. We made a number of notes of things to fix, I got back to the shop and started making changes. But it was there that I noticed one other issue. To explain it, though, we've got to rewind back to before that test session. I spent a number of days getting the car's setup dialed in. I weighed it, corner balanced it, and spent a lot of time aligning it. A lot of you guys have asked about this aspect of the build, so let's cover some of the details while we're at it. With the engine cover on the car, but without me in it, it weighs 2,461 pounds. That's 1,116 kilograms for everybody else, and that does include all of the things we've added to the car, including the RS Motorsport roll cage. With me in the car, the scales tipped higher than I would have liked to 2,636 pounds, but overall, I think that's a pretty good number. The car's crossweights look pretty damn good right out of the gate, but there's room for improvement, and while we're at it, I want to swap out our springs for stiffer units. We established what our motion ratio is in the last episode, and after some math at figuring out what we want for a wheel rate, I got some custom springs ordered from H&R, and we're gonna swap them out. As you can see from the side-by-side with the springs we had before, these are way beefier, and they're going to do a better job of managing the suspension loads and the aero on the car. To perform the alignment, I had to buy a set of race strings. There's no way this would be possible on a typical alignment rack without spending hours to do it, and given I'm going to be adjusting this car a lot in the future, I figured I might as well own the tools myself. Setting this stuff up took an entire day, but now that it's all calibrated, it shouldn't be too much of an effort to align this thing in the future. For those not familiar, we'll be measuring from the string to the wheel to calculate things like toe and proper track width. Additional equipment will tell us things like camber and caster, and as a whole, we should be able to set the Ferrari up to handle at least reasonably well as a baseline. The downside, though, is that all of the control arms are Heim-jointed, and as a result, they must be removed from the car to be adjusted, reinstalled, and then all of the measurements must be taken again. This means doing the initial first alignment, given we're starting from scratch, took many hours to do. But with Will's guidance, I got everything set up, and our initial numbers we're going to work with are about 1.5 degrees of camber in the rear and 3.5 in the front. I've got 8 degrees of caster, and we're aiming for about 1/8 inch of toe in at the back and 0 in the front. We set our ride height, got an approximate rake dialed in, and dialed in the angle of the front splitter, all to give us something to work with as we start dialing the car in at the racetrack. All of this, of course, to say that we did a lot of work to get the car dialed in, and thus were surprised at the racetrack when the rear end of the car was sitting about 1/2 inch lower than we had anticipated. Initially, we chalked this up to settling springs. It's unlikely they'd settle that much, but we did pull the rear end apart and take a look at all of the joints and bolts, and everything still appeared to be in place. After all, this is what testing is for, so we put the car back together and went back out on track, and everything worked just fine. After getting the car back to the shop, step 1 was to begin disassembly so we could look over everything. As said before, I'm not a professional and this is a garage-built car, so anything could fail. And it's here that I found that we had a fatigue crack on the chassis. This is where I had welded the new coilover mount to the original Ferrari material, and as it turns out, it wasn't quite up to the task. But this isn't a surprise. In the initial CAD drawing for my shock mounts, I even designed a reinforcement because I anticipated this might happen. The square Ferrari tubing that I attached my shock tower to isn't really meant for the axial loads that it's going to see, especially with the increased spring rate. But somewhere along the line, I forgot to add these reinforcements in, and so now we need to do it. I drilled holes at the end of the cracks as is standard procedure to keep them from re-cracking and advancing, and then I welded everything back up. It took a bit of force to move the shock towers back into their original position, but for those curious, the shock towers only moved about 1/4 of an inch until they made contact with the vertical support members and weren't able to move any further, which is why their car performed just fine. Our reinforcement is going to tie the shock tower into those vertical support members with additional material so that this doesn't happen again, and from here on out, we should be ready to rock. I also found that the original torque specs supplied for Corvettes by Chevrolet are not adequate and have been revised to include red Loctite and significantly more torque, so I made those adjustments and got things tightened down. I made a few changes elsewhere on the car, gave it a complete once-over, and now it's ready for more track abuse. But as I've said before, I don't think there's any point in going fast if you don't look good doing it. So I've enlisted the help of my good friend Blake Adams to help design a livery for our trip to Australia. If we're going to play the role of a race car, it's time to look like one. So now we're going to take the car over to the race studio in Corona, California to apply Blake's design. To understand the race studio as a brand, it's important to look at what goes on behind the shop door. Ryan and Devin's personal projects range from a Z4 GT3 build to a range of air-cooled 911s, BMW 2002s, and E36s. But when they're not entrenched in builds of their own, they specialize in graphic design, both for branding and, as you might guess, for liveries. They can design, print, and cut everything in-house. And thankfully, as friends of both Blake and StanceWorks, they were willing to tackle our project too. And these are clearly the right guys for the job. The design that Blake has penned up will require a lot of precision. It's quite geometric and requires many elements to be lined up perfectly across the car's curves. Some panels of the Ferrari will be rewrapped and color changed, while others will remain the same familiar white you've grown accustomed to. On top of the base colors, numerous elements will be added. It's going to be a unique design, featuring some loud colors to say the least. The inspiration for our livery is multifaceted. At first, we attempted to aim for something supremely 1980s, but eventually we landed on something at the other end of the spectrum. It's something I like to think that no one's quite seen before, and the race studio brought this futuristic vision to life with absolute precision and perfection. After 2 grueling days of getting every detail perfect, I am excited to show you the end result. Blake landed on a design that brings in elements from some of our favorite sources of inspiration, specifically sources of science fiction from when this car was new, the idea of what the future looked like back in 1981, and needless to say, he absolutely nailed it. The car is full of details both large and small, and trust me when I say you have to see it in person to truly appreciate it. But on top of looking good, a race car livery is meant to celebrate a race car's sponsors. So I want to make sure I celebrate those who made this build possible, starting, of course, with H&R. Because without them, neither the car nor its suspension would even exist. They signed on from day one and brought this project to life. Following H&R is Haltech, who not only supplies the car with all of its technology, but is bringing the car to their home turf in Australia, making this insane trip a reality. If it weren't for Riley at RS Motorsport, this car wouldn't be fit for that competition. He worked tirelessly to build a roll cage that fit the bill in time, and there's no question no one could do it better. Ryan from Rywire supplied the car's wiring, or in other words, the nervous system that makes all of these systems work together. Every electrical integration we've performed so far has gone seamlessly thanks to him. And then there's RS Future, who built an incredible aero package for this car that helps transform it from regular road car to something far beyond. Element Fire Extinguishers has been a supporter of this project since I started the YouTube channel. And when the opportunity to go to Australia and actually compete with this car became a reality, they were eager to help make that happen. Not only is Element adding a degree of safety to the project, they're providing key support to help get this car to the other side of the planet. Of course, there's CSF, who's provided all of the cooling equipment for the project, and as proven during our first session under the hot desert sun at Willow, they're keeping the car cool under pressure. And the same could be said for me. Without their support, I'd be sweating it, literally and figuratively. But I know I can head across the world with confidence that the car will perform as anticipated. Plenty of you will remember all of the headaches we've dealt with when it comes to wheels in this car, but Rotiform stepped up and provided an incredible set of ROCHs that fit the bill perfectly. They're lightweight, strong, and they look incredible. And then of course there's the Race Studio, which you now know brought this livery to life. A number of these brands adorn the top of the driver's side fender to further cement them in place as brands that helped bring this project to life. But on the other side, there are important brands too, like the Drive Shaft Shop, Pennzoil, Animal Auto, Send Cut Send, and Lightbow, all of whom were pivotal in ensuring this car got done in time to make this absolutely incredible trip happen. And then there's one other brand I'm adding to the mix that you're probably not familiar with, and that's Bamikaze Garage. Jamie at Bamikaze was eager for any way that he could support this project and the mission at hand. And what makes that special is that Jamie and his cohorts have bought the cheapest S2000 in the UK, and they'll be taking it from an absolute rusty pile of junk to a race-ready ripper on their YouTube channel, which you can check out at Bamikaze Garage. Jamie's a Honda guy at heart and an incredible storyteller, which has earned him a huge audience at his other channel, Oddboz. So a special thanks to Jamie for stepping up and also supporting this project. All of these sponsors help make the livery what it is, and as a result, I think the Ferrari 244 GTK turned out spectacularly. So with our colorway and graphics done, now it's time to head to the track. For our second and final test session before we ship the car out of the country, I've rented Horse Thief Mile at Willow Springs International Raceway. It's not an ideal track, but it will help us test the car and load it up in ways we have yet to do. Will Dries has returned for this trip and is once again offering his expertise in helping us develop this car. Everything we learned from our first test day last weekend can now be applied and modified this time around. We've made a number of changes and fixes, so it's now time to find out how those changes perform, but more importantly, this trip isn't about setting any super fast laps. Horse Thief isn't great for that. Instead, this test day is about making sure there are no further glaring issues before we send the car thousands of miles away from home to the World Time Attack Challenge. Originally designed as a motorcycle track, Horse Thief Mile, as you might guess, is only a mile long. It has 11 turns, most of which are on camber, and load the car up quite aggressively given the actual turn speed. But its coarse pavement and its complete lack of runoff anywhere make it an unforgiving track. It may look tame from the sky, but it is certainly a car killer. Throughout the day, we performed a number of sessions with quite a few laps, and the car was happy through all of them. Given that our last test day was cut short just as we were trying to put heat in the tires, that's where we picked up this time around. I was confident in pushing the car significantly harder, and thus it was easy to get temps into our Falcon RT660s. They were providing more than enough grip to push on the car as hard as I was comfortable doing given the nature of the track. And the wear patterns on the tires were showing that our suspension geometry was acting exactly as we hoped. As I stated last time, the car is confidence-inspiring. I feel really good in this thing, and comfortable leaning on it harder than I expected I'd be able to this early in the testing process. I don't know that I'll go 10 tenths in Australia, but I'm feeling confident that I can at least lean on this thing hard and put in some reasonably decent laps. Now, because everybody asked for more audio of this thing, enjoy. Now, as said, we never pushed the car all that hard. The goal was to test the car and get temperatures into the tire, and it performed wonderfully. Given that it was even hotter than the last test day, all of our fluid temps stayed perfectly level, and the car seems ready enough for Sydney. The only real issue that we encountered all day was the fact that I keep breaking turbo support mounts, but after getting the car back to the shop, I've figured out why and I've engineered a new solution that has it ready for our trip. But not wanting to break or crack the manifold at the last minute, we decided to transition from testing on track to getting our brake bias dialed in perfectly. Will and Regan watched very closely for a number of back-to-back runs towards which wheels locked up first, and after dialing in the pedal box, we feel pretty confident that we won't have the rear wheels locked up unexpectedly. It's one of the final but most important steps in making sure this car feels comfortable and confident as we take it out to Sydney Motorsport Park. At this point, we feel pretty good about everything. There's no question that another 3, 4, or 5 test days would get us feeling a lot better, but overall, I think we're ready to drag this thing up to San Francisco where we'll be shipping it out of the port. And if we're not ready, well, too bad, because the clock has been ticking regardless. This test day was just 48 hours before we needed to have it at the port for shipping, where we loaded it into a warehouse, and shipping experts will do what they do best and hopefully keep this thing safe for its trip across the Pacific. In the final hours we had it to ourselves, we fixed a few things like designing a new turbo mount, as well as draining the fuel, removing the battery, and coating the roll cage in Cosmoline to help keep it from rusting on its journey. But now it's in their hands, and all I can do is wait patiently to arrive in Australia. So just like that, the Ferrari is officially gone. It is not in my possession. It is not in the shop for the first time in 2.5 years, which is honestly kind of an awful feeling. I have not been without it, and it's got every dollar and hour I've had to my name put into it, and now I'm trusting some people I don't know to ship it to the other side of the planet. But fingers crossed, everything should go well. This is what they do. So thank you again to Haltech and to World Time Attack Challenge for making this whole thing happen. And of course, thank you again to all of the other sponsors on the car for pulling together and helping get this car not only brought to life, but finished so that we can do this. I'm really excited for it. But with that said, the question is now, what do we do next? What comes next? What am I gonna do? And I've been asking myself that too. I feel kind of naked without the Ferrari here. But with that said, next week we are diving into Corey's E30. If you have not seen the 2 episodes I've put out on this car already, do that right now. They're some of my favorites that I've done. If you enjoy StanceWorks storytelling, you don't want to miss this one. We're going to get it back on the road. Corey's brother's flying into town, and we're going to take this thing for the first drive since Corey passed away. It's going to be fantastic. I've been looking as forward to this as I have driving the Ferrari. This is a big one for me. Once this is out of the way, we've got a Model A we need to put back together, and I need to get it sold. And then we've got an Audi we've got to put together with tons of stuff to fabricate. We've got to get the engine swapped in. We've got to put all the suspension back on the car. We've got to build a whole turbo assembly and setup, manifold, intake, charge piping, exhaust, all of it. It's going to make a lot of power. Should be pretty sweet. We got to get it done by October for the Overcrest Rally. So we've got a lot of work to do and a lot of stuff to accomplish. Plus the fact that August is going to be here before we know it. We're going to fly to Australia and we're going to race in the World Time Attack Challenge. It's going to be sick. I am so stoked. I hope you guys are too. Thank you as always for the support. I got to get to work on this thing. I'll catch you guys next week.